Has to work quickly. Down to 6 seconds. Carr going down again. And it's Quentin Williams this time for the Jets.
Over the middle in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown. The punter to beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown most likely.
Looks right, fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel Mims.
And welcome back to another episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. We're your hosts, Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Another head coaching candidate profile breakdown, this time with Brian Daboll, the offensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills. Michael, he's a hot candidate. A lot of Jets fans want him. Arguably the best candidate on the market, considering what he's done for Josh Allen and that Bills team. What are your initial thoughts on Brian Daboll potentially being the head coach of the New York Jets?
Yeah, Daboll's been a guy who I've been really high on as a candidate for a long time, or at least through what he's done this season, because what he's done with Josh Allen is just incredible. How quickly he's progressed, how much he's progressed, both from his first year to his second, and then even more so from 2019 to this year, is just the absolute, maybe the most impressive first 3-year progression of a quarterback we've ever seen. So it's really remarkable what he's done. He's got a great background with the coaches he's worked under, Belichick, Saban. So he's definitely one of my favorite candidates for sure. And I think the Jets would definitely be lucky to get him with some of the more enticing openings out there. But Daboll is a guy who I've been really high on.
And he does have connections to the Jets. He was the quarterback's coach for Eric Mangini in 2007, 2008. So you never know. I mean, there's certainly more attractive openings. I'm sure he's going to get a job this offseason. But we said that about Eric Bieniemy for the last 2 years. So you never know. But Daboll would certainly be an A-plus hire if he is the guy. And as we've done with all these head coaching candidate breakdowns, we bring in somebody from that team who covers that team, who knows a hell of a lot more about these candidates than we do. We are joined by Greg Tompsett from Cover One. Greg, how you doing, man?
Not too bad. Looking forward to it. It's very different to be on this end of these discussions. We've been the team for 20 years begging other teams to be like, oh man, I hope we can get that guy, and usually settling for like our third or fourth choice. So having people try to hire our people is a very foreign experience to me, but I'll try to do my best.
Yeah, we have no idea what that's like. Has there been anyone who wants one of our coaches in the 10 plus years I've been following this team closely?
Was Belichick the last one? I mean, literally, it's an enviable position to be in, but it's also a bummer because
it's stressful.
Bills, yeah, exactly. For Bills fans, it's like, whoa, wait, this is a guy who has turned Josh Allen around from one of the most disliked prospects, at least on draft Twitter. A lot of the old heads loved his boomer bust potential, and he has hit his ceiling to the max. I mean, I don't think many people thought that Josh Allen could turn around some of the flaws that people saw in his game, from his accuracy and whatnot. Obviously, he was a physically impressive talent, but Daboll deserves a lot of credit for what he's done for Josh Allen. I mean, they've built a system around him. They've given him the players that support his strengths. The Bills are a perfect example on how to surround your young quarterback with talent. Meanwhile, the Jets with Sam Darnold are the complete antithesis of that. But Greg, let's just talk about Brian Daboll's offensive scheme. I mean, before we get into him as a head coach, how would you describe his philosophy and what he tries to do on offense?
So it's an Earhart Perkins base, so it's going to be in that similar language that you see in many other setups, but it's very matchup based. He is not a guy who's going to say, nope, this is what we do and we're going to make you defend it. If you struggle against the run, they're going to have a run heavy approach. There haven't been very many of those this year, but they've tilted into that. Then you have games where you heard Pete Carroll after the Seahawks game saying, well, we had a great plan to stop the run, and Brian Daboll didn't care. They passed the ball 28 of the first 30 plays of the game. He's going to lean into whatever your weaknesses are. He's going to wear it out and hit it with a sledgehammer, not lean into it, not 40, 50, 60%. He's going to do it until you stop. And if you don't, they're going to put up 56 points.
So obviously the biggest draw with Daboll is the work he's done with Josh Allen, taking a guy who was the prototype boomer bust prospect with having a very low floor, obviously never really produced even in college, but also had a very high floor with the physical tools that he brought to the table. And he has probably even exceeded the ceiling that most people thought that he had. So the work that he's done with Josh Allen is the main draw of his appeal as a head coach. So what are the particular things that Daboll has been able to do to get the most out of Josh Allen, to take him from where he was coming out of Wyoming to the borderline MVP candidate? I mean, he could have won MVP in a lot of other years, if Aaron Rodgers wasn't as amazing as he's been this season. But so what are the things he's done to take Josh Allen from a guy who has all the tools, but a lot of work to do to get the most out of them, to a guy who at this point, 2 years later, is one of the best quarterbacks in the league?
So first, for Josh Allen, there's three pieces to that pie. Obviously, you don't have a lot of guys willing to rip their mechanics down to the studs every offseason and rebuild them with a quarterback guru like Jordan Palmer and just try to turn himself into what he needs to be with an incredible amount of work ethic and humility. You know, a lot of guys, I always joke all the time that Josh Allen is what Jeff George or Jamarcus Russell could have been. You know, they had that potential, and that howitzer connected to their right shoulder. He just was willing to put in the work to build himself into that. Another third of it is Brandon Beane surrounding him with the great offensive line and great talent, and, you know, Cole Beasley, John Brown, and then trading for Stephon Diggs. That was another big piece of it. The other third is Brian Daboll, and he's been able to put him into a position where, you know, he protected him from himself early. He didn't try to put him into bad positions. He tried to lean into things he was comfortable with. They were comfortable doing a lot of the first read and then run stuff in his first year or two because he's an athlete and that's what he was comfortable doing. Then they progressed, then they added on, then they progressed, then they added on, and you evolve into a system now where they still lean into things Josh is good at, and he suggests and calls plays. So Daboll is very comfortable. Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley have both brought in different route combinations that they liked from their previous destinations or previous locations. Josh suggests things during the game. Sometimes he'll have Ken Dorsey call up to the booth to say, hey, I'd like to see us put in this. I think I see something. But Daboll is very flexible in what he does to stress the defense. You saw a couple different plays this past week, something that might not seem like that big of a deal, but he ended up setting up a play where Josh was able to have the time to look off the safeties and hit a double move off of a cover zero blitz. And it's really hard to set up the protections to let a quarterback have enough time to look off safeties with a double move to John Brown. It ended up looking like an easy touchdown down the right sideline. It was against Xavier Howard. It was against one of the best cornerbacks in the league with a zero blitz coming. Having the intelligence of how to set up the protections, how to be able to disguise what's going on with the defense and put your quarterback into a position like that is pretty rare. He's really strong at leaning into the strengths of his receivers, his offense, his quarterback, and Josh Allen has obviously benefited from that greatly.
Yeah, I think his malleability of his scheme and building a scheme around his players is what makes him so attractive as a potential head coach. I mean, you see it too many times, and the Jets have certainly experienced this under Adam Gase, where they try to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it just doesn't work. The Jets didn't build a system around Darnold. They didn't do the things that Daboll did for Josh Allen. And especially if Daboll were to become the head coach of the Jets, he's either going to have to rebuild a guy like Sam Darnold, or he's going to have to do what he did with Josh Allen for Justin Fields, a supremely physically talented quarterback, some issues elsewhere in his game, or Zach Wilson, kind of a similar story there, a guy who was quarterback at BYU. So it's encouraging to see that he has a track record, and there's not many coaches that have had this much of an impact on the QB like Daboll has had for Allen. The other thing that's intriguing about Daboll is the coaching tree that he comes from. He's been under two of the best coaches in all of football, and Bill Belichick and Nick Saban. How do you think that might have helped him transition to becoming a head coach?
So that's the one area that I don't have a great feel for, is that Sean McDermott runs everything in that building. Like, that is his team in every sense of the word. He leads and structures everything. He's one of the most detail-oriented people I've ever met. Like, when he walked in, he literally had a binder with what he was going to do on every single day for the first 365 days in the job. Literally, like, down to the, what he was going to do at 4:00 on September 4th, like stuff like that. He controls everything. I hope that the takeaway from that is learning structure, learning the importance of an infrastructure for a team. And then you combine that with, obviously, the all-time greats of learning under Belichick and Saban. My hope is that he comes forward with that with great leadership skills. There haven't been a great amount of opportunity to see, does he have that it factor and those leadership skills? Because when you're under dominating presences like Bill Belichick, Nick Saban, and to a different degree, but still a dominating presence in Sean McDermott that control everything in the organization. That's my only unknown. I don't have any reason to doubt Brian Daboll. It's just I don't think he's had a great deal of opportunity to lead per se. I will say the players love him and vouch for him and really rally around him personally, and that usually is a pretty good sign.
And as you sort of touched on, because my question is going or was going to be, what are the traits you think he has that do fit that profile of a head coach? Because like you mentioned, the biggest question is, can he be that it factor, that leader in the locker room? And we don't really know that because he's coaching under a guy in Sean McDermott who already handles most of that. But based on what you can see and have seen from him so far, what traits has he shown? And like you already touched on with his relationship with the players, what traits has he shown that sort of show off the potential that he can be a good head coach?
So if I'm a Jets fan and I'm looking for signs of being able to do that, I think that malleability you talked about in the offensive scheme, I would lean into hoping that that applies to other philosophies and strategy, that he's willing to cater his approach and his style to what's best for the players, to have structure and expectation, but not, you're not talking Tom Coughlin iron fist kind of madness. So how can you manage that kind of thing? And in today's modern NFL, are you able to, follow a solid plan that players know what to expect and are able to work with you, but you're not, overly demanding and trusting them as men. I also, Sean McDermott is huge on talking about things that traditional football guys don't talk about, and like he says that he loves his players and he wants them to love each other, and they spend a great deal of time talking about their personal lives and why they play and why it matters to them and what their motivations are, so that they know each other. So when you're out there fighting for a guy, why you're fighting for him. That would be a big hope for me in a team hiring Daboll, is that you're bringing that with. I think it's been a huge part of building the culture and the chemistry in the locker room of what the Bills have built. I think on the field, he needs to probably pair himself with an experienced, maybe former head coach as a defensive coordinator, not dissimilar from a Sean McVay, Wade Phillips kind of scenario where, hey, go be the head coach of defense. I'm going to run things over here and call the plays. I'm still calling the shots on game day here, but that's your world. You go ahead and run it and do what you need to do. And if he pairs up with the right person there, I think you could be really onto something.
Yeah, he's certainly an intriguing candidate. I think that the question that many Jets fans are going to have is if the Jets are willing to go with that type of structure. Again, clearly it can work when you look at San Francisco and LA, but the Jets didn't hire the right man for that, and Adam Gase and Greg Williams, and they tried to run that system. And I think we've heard all offseason about having a CEO, a guy who's not just too focused on one side of the ball. And so when you hear that, and then you hear that might not be Daboll's strengths, at least initially. I mean, he has learned under some terrific head coaches that he could be that CEO. I think there's at least a question mark. And that's one of those things in his interview that when Joe Douglas sits down with him and they talk about what his plan is for the team, the staff that he's going to build, that's where you're going to learn a lot about the type of philosophy that Brian Daboll is going to have. But certainly intriguing outside of Josh Allen, because we talked about some of the things that Brian Daboll does well from a player communication standpoint and a development standpoint and a malleability standpoint and the leadership that he's learned from Belichick, McDermott, and Saban. But one of the most underrated aspects to being a good coach is that development, that ability to be a good teacher, that being involved in, it's kind of the balance of you have to be able to delegate some things, but you want to be involved in every level. And Daboll, as an offensive coordinator, has had some great development stories outside of Josh Allen. Can you just talk about some of the players in the Bills offense who've really taken off under Brian Daboll?
Sure. And it's a nice mix of kind of reclamation projects and guys coming from different spots. They've been able to, so there's a fine line in development versus being pigheaded and sticking with guys who you need to be able to move on from because they're not cutting it, and not letting that investment override your decisions. So a key piece will be the relationship between him and Joe Douglas, who I'm a fan of. I think Douglas is a bright football mind, making sure that they're on the same page of what they're looking for in players and what they're willing to do. So some examples are the Bills invested a 40th overall pick in Cody Ford. Well, Ike Bacher was playing better than him, and he's a practice squad, undrafted free agent call up. But you had to play the right guy, and you had to be able to bring them along and do those things. Taking a shot on Darrell Williams. So Brandon Beane had a history with him in Carolina. He played at an all-pro level. Well, then he got hurt, and then he played like trash, last year. And now in hindsight, he probably rushed his rehab back trying to get a contract. He probably then was asked to play out a position on the left side, which he had never done before. Those things combined for him to put up some pretty bad film. But the Bills took a shot on that. And then they went through, hey, we've made all this investment in Josh Allen. Are we willing to put a reclamation project like that out there at right tackle and hope that he can keep our prized possession safe? It's paid off in spades, and it's been fantastic. In fact, he's probably too expensive for us now, and we're going to be able to re-sign him this offseason. So those kind of things. Then some younger players. There's some balance to it. They've had really high-end athletes like Dawson Knox, who's had some flashes here or there, but has struggled. Well, they've leaned into guys like Lee Smith, who is an amazing blocking tight end, but not exactly an athlete that's going to, scare anybody. But they're not just going to keep dumping reps into a guy who's not doing his job. And, giving Isaiah McKenzie a creative role in the offense when I think we checked this at one point. I think he's documented as the shortest wide receiver in the NFL. So that's not exactly the normal fit for everybody to have I think they're polite and say 5'7", and really he's much closer to 5'6". But he still is a great, gadget guy, return guy, jet sweeps, and now he's turning into a pretty solid slot receiver. So being able to be patient and work through and find roles for those people. Obviously, Josh is by far the best example of patience and skill set and building an offense around him to succeed, but he's certainly not the only one.
Yeah, and as a Bills fan, certainly you don't want to lose Daboll. So if you had to make a pitch of the negatives to Brian Daboll, and you're going to say, let's say you're on the line with Joe Douglas, and you're trying to convince Joe Douglas not to hire Brian Daboll, what are some of the things that you're going to bring up? What are concerns that you have about Brian Daboll making that jump from great offense coordinator to great head coach?
So the biggest one's going to be the track record versus the one-year wonder. It's going to be, hey, so I'll try to be genuine about this because there's reasons why. If you go back and look at the quarterbacks that he had in his stretches with Miami and Cleveland and Kansas City, I think we actually put it together at one point. The best quarterback that he had that entire stretch was Matt Moore, was the best quarterback he had. But the results were terrible. He was a bad offensive coordinator. There's a reason he had a bunch of one-year stints and it didn't go all that well. And he got kind of kicked around a couple times. And then the first couple of years in Buffalo were okay. Like they were better than the previous subs. They weren't anything special. Like he wasn't knocking down any doors to get head coaching opportunities. So the fear would be that pie that I described to you, and I described it as 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The fear would be that it was actually 45% Brandon Beane adding talent, 45% Josh Allen taking a huge step forward, and 10% Brian Daboll, that you just happened to be the guy in charge when Stephon Diggs walked in and Josh Allen got good. I don't think that's true. I think that he's a very genuine piece of this. Josh Allen speaks about him to an unbelievably emotional level. I'll tell a quick story. You guys probably hear about the thing where the Bills fans raised all the money for Josh Allen's grandma after she died, and ended up being over $1 million and all the crazy stuff. So he didn't tell anybody that happened the night before except Brian Daboll and Sean McDermott. He was a wreck that Saturday night, wasn't sure he could play, wasn't sure what was going on. Told Daboll about it and said, they said, it's up to you. You let us know. And if you're ready to go, we won't tell anybody. We'll just let you play and handle it. That's what they decided to do. So after the game, he played, at that point, the best game of his career. He outdueled Russell Wilson and won a shootout against Russell Wilson, came into the locker room afterwards, the first guy that found him was Daboll. He kind of went to hug him, and Josh collapsed into his arms, and the two of them sobbed for 5 minutes over that. And that's not the kind of thing that happens with somebody that you're good buddies with, and hey, we have a good working relationship. That's somebody who you genuinely care about and that matters to you and that you had a real connection with. And if you're able to connect with people like that, that's a skill that translates in a pretty special way. So as a Bills fan, I desperately hope he's the Eric Bieniemy of this year, and that the Bills go on a crazy run, and everybody's asking themselves, "Oh my God, how is this possible that Brian Daboll didn't get a head coaching job? He was so qualified for it." But I certainly expect and am ready for him to get the gig that he deserves.
Well, my next question, the story you just told kind of really answers it, but when you picture Brian Daboll as a head coach, what moments do you look back on, whether it's schematically an adjustment he makes in the game, whether it's coaching wise, moments like the one you explained with Josh Allen? When you picture him becoming a head coach, what particular moments do you look back on as examples of why he is going to be making that leap?
So that is certainly a good one. Some other things I would say, some of the matter of fact, I'll even give a question. So his willingness to change his comfort level, he prefers to be on the sideline and be down there talking with guys and in the mix. He's discovered that he's a better offensive coordinator and play caller from the booth, and is willing to pivot and do that because that's what was best for the team. It makes me question a little bit how he will do that on game day. As the head coach, because I'm 100%, so not 100% certain, it would be silly to hire someone like him and not have him be the play caller. It's one of his best skills. Like, he's fantastic at it. His timing of how to sequence plays and how he straight up tricks defenses, where we see plays that it's easy to see right after they happen, but he'll set it up and lull people into a false sense of security with jet motion. Doesn't mean anything all day. Every once in a while, a handoff, no big deal. Then all of a sudden, they keep running a drag off the left side. Nobody really pays attention to it. All of a sudden, in a critical moment, we send Isaiah McKenzie on the jet motion and up a wheel route up the sideline that you've been getting tricked by that drag coming across. And all of a sudden, the corner takes 2 or 3 steps with the drag and boom, Isaiah McKenzie's by you. He will set things like that up that we will see in week 15. They're like, "Oh my God, we remember when he set that up so many times and everybody fell for it. And now it's just a free touchdown." And he'll do that a half dozen times every season, where he just schematically creates a free touchdown. And those are nice. Those aren't easy to come by.
What are those nowadays.
Like? So that creativity is really what shows it to me, because he's doing that. What he just did the last 3 games, the Bills put up 142 points in the last 3 games. You want to know who the defensive minds were in those 3 games? Vic Fangio, Bill Belichick, and Brian Flores. He put up 142 points on Vic Fangio, Bill Belichick, and Brian Flores. That's about as good of an endorsement as I could possibly give.
And then obviously another big part of becoming a head coach is the staff you put together. It's something that, the Jets with the candidates they've looked at have had questions about, obviously, probably wrongly, with Matt Rule and going with Adam Gase over him a couple years
ago.
Probably. I think that's sort of TBD. But in terms of the staff with Brian Daboll, what sort of staff do you see him building? He's got such a great background with spending time at Alabama, with New England, now obviously in Buffalo. So what sort of staff do you see him putting together if he does get a head job?
So I would say I expect quite a bit more of his staff to come from his background than from the Bills. It won't be 0. I don't think none of the coaches would go with. He has very few previous connections with anyone there. They didn't bring anyone with. Almost all of the hires were directly by Sean McDermott. Most of them the year before, because McDermott and Bean got there a year before Daboll. They had much of the staff in place, and then Daboll came in, and a big chunk of that was kept. And a handful of guys came over, but they were from different connections or no connection with them. So I could see Bobby Johnson's the offensive line coach. I think he's the kind of guy that maybe isn't ready to be a play caller, but maybe ready to be a game planner and coordinator under a play calling head coach. I could see that. Wide receiver coach Chad Hall is similar. I don't think either of them are ready to, neither of them would be my call to be the replacement for Brian Daboll, because I don't think either of them are ready to be play callers, but I think they're game planners with that in their future. And a stepping stone might be a 3-year stint as a play calling head coach as offensive coordinator. For that reason, some people might connect quarterback coach Ken Dorsey with Daboll. Dorsey's background is in Carolina, again, connected with McDermott and Bean much more so than Daboll. But I actually think Dorsey would be the likely replacement for Daboll, just staying with Josh Allen and moving up a step from quarterback coach to coordinator. On the defensive side, obviously you have defensive line coach Eric Washington, who was the defensive coordinator in Carolina. I don't think that Leslie Frazier would go for a lateral to move with. So those are a couple names. I would expect the majority of the names to come from his connections at Alabama and in New England, from his past history that he would pluck and put together. He's pretty singularly like the super qualified candidate guy on the staff. There's not a ton of other guys getting interviews. So I don't think there's somebody obvious that, especially on the defensive side, that I'm like, oh man, Leslie Frazier's there, we can't give him a defensive coordinator job. Somebody's going to steal that guy. We don't really have that guy per se right now. Bobby Babich might be the closest one. Our secondary coach is a guy that people like a lot, and that might have that in his future. But I think he'd be more of the opposite of what I said with their Eberflus. He'd be more of the coordinator under a defensive minded head coach that's making more of the calls, but that's his step forward. So some of those kind of pieces are names you could look for. Bobby Johnson, Chad Hall, Eric Washington, and Bobby Babich are the top names from the Bills staff, but I'd expect more of the names, honestly, to come from other past stops from him.
Right. Definitely makes sense. And you mentioned a little bit earlier that maybe he should be paired with a former head coach as a defensive coordinator. That would be a position.
Especially as a first-time head coach. I think it makes a ton of sense.
Certainly. I think it makes sense for pretty much any first-time head coach to have at least one former head coach on that staff, somewhere that you can lean on. So his staff is certainly an interesting part of his equation. I expect him to get a job. Let's wipe out the Jets for just this question. And then the last one we'll pivot towards the Jets, but a Brian Daboll coach team, what is their philosophy? What type of players do you think he's going to want pressure Joe Douglas or whoever the GM is to bring in to meld that vision that Brian Daboll has for his football club?
So I think one of the biggest takeaways, if any team tries, they're the copycat league type thing that the NFL often is, if you're going to take anything away from what Buffalo has done, it's don't make exceptions on the right fit for your team. So the Bills lean very much into hyper competitive football is the top priority, team oriented things. Now, some people translated that into they don't take exceptions on players or they want all choir boys. That's not the case. John Feliciano is not a nice person. Just Stephon Diggs has had histories with things. There's guys who are mean, nasty, tough players that get penalties and are not choir boys, but hyper competitive, super team oriented football is a huge priority. They don't roll the dice on guys who are just athletic trait pieces. If that's what he takes with, and I think that's the biggest takeaway from that locker room he's now spent 3 years in, and that would be the connection with Joe Douglas is, hey, let's trust your gut. You've spent your life building up as a great evaluator of talent. Don't let that override that just bringing in the talented guy, we can make it work. And I don't want to poke fun, but, don't throw money at a George Fant because you see he's a really good athlete and I'm pretty sure we can make it work. But, it's sometimes guys who lean into a history of scouting and athletic traits will convince themselves we can turn this guy into a great football player. Whereas I'd rather have the Bills take more questionable, like the mock draftable webs and the RAS scores, the relative athletic scores. The Bills take more questionable players off of that than any team. Like guys who people are like, oh my gosh, that guy's going to be a bust. He doesn't match up in these metrics, but they're really good at finding football players, like guys who are really good at what they do. I would hope that's his approach and that they build a culture around that and finding the right fit for guys. Cause he's going to, once you find him, he's going to run an aggressive, nasty offense that puts up a lot of points because he's going to find the weakness in the other team.
Greg, did you really just slander our man, George Fant, like that? I mean, that's a CYJ legend right there, who, by the way, I think you're criminally underrating. I mean, he was actually pretty solid this year, but fine. I mean, I guess we won't take it personally. And Michael, I know you have the last question of the day, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to move on from that. I don't even want Brian Daboll now.
Yeah, if Brian Dable's not on board with George Fanton, he can go to the Chargers. He could stay in Buffalo. He can go wherever he wants. He might as well have criticized Braden Mann. That's how much of a crime that is.
That I can respect that. I was a big fan of Braid Man coming out in this draft. I can respect that one.
At least we can agree on that one. But to wrap it all up, I think it's interesting how you discuss sort of his philosophy, because there are similarities and differences with Joe Douglas. Because in terms of being football first, culture oriented, Douglas has really harped on that, and he delivered on it in the draft. He definitely didn't just he walked his talk in the draft. He picked a lot of team captains, almost no character concerns whatsoever. So he's really talked up the culture and delivered on that. But at the same time, like you mentioned, Fant and many other picks and signings he made are very much banking on talent and athletic upside more so than pure football, with guys like Brashad Perriman, and other guys he drafted, Jabari Zuniga, Cameron Carr, guys who are more so based on traits more so than actual football and just pure technical ability. So there are those differences. The culture is there, but in terms of the evaluation, there are some differences. But I think to wrap it all up, if Brian Daboll were the hire, and you're talking to Jets, for the Jets in particular, if Brian Daboll were the hire, what would your pitch be to Jets fans as to why they should be excited about it?
So by far the easiest and cleanest endorsement I can give is I'd be furious. I would be really upset as a Bills guy.
I think that's all we need.
Yeah, no, honestly, it's the simplest and cleanest endorsement I can give is I'd be petrified that he fixes Sam Darnold or fixes whatever quarterback that you pick number 2 and does what he did with Josh Allen. Because I mentioned earlier that it wasn't just him that did that, but he knows the things that Josh did to get it fixed. So if they pick the right guy and he can guide him on how to do that and then take the steps to make the right play calls to put him into a position to succeed, I don't want to face that twice a year. I don't want that in my life.
Well, that's about as good a sales pitch as we've heard. I mean, you get to hurt your rival and benefit. It remains to be seen if Brian Daboll can be that CEO type of coach that the Jets are looking for. But damn, is he an attractive candidate? I mean, I really, especially if the Jets are going to go in the direction of a young quarterback, surrounding that young quarterback with as much talent and as much guidance as possible, especially after all the mistakes they made with Sam Darnold, should be of top priority. And a guy like Daboll with his resume, I mean, it's going to be hard to pass up. It makes sense why he was one of the first candidates that the Jets requested. Greg, you mentioned this before we started recording, but if you had to make a prediction on where Daboll will end up this offseason, I have a feeling it's not going to be New York, right?
I don't think so. I think there's some enticing pieces that, Mekhi Becton and Denzel Mims, there's some nice young building blocks in New York that I do think are better than the record and the season indicates. I do think you might have had the worst head coach in history. He's right up there.
We will not argue with that. We're not.
Yeah, right up there.
That.
So, I do think that I made the similar prediction that the guy who followed Freddie Kitchens in Cleveland was just going to look like a genius simply by comparison and by default next to him. You're going to get that. You're going to get a competent adult in the room who can do a good job, and he's going to look great just because he's not Adam Gase.
I mean, we could hire Bill O'Brien, but
hey, careful what you wish for. So I will say I don't think Brian Daboll is going to be that coach. One of the main ones is he has an existing connection in Los Angeles. The GM of the Chargers also went to St. Francis High School in Western New York. They were teammates together and played football together there. They have a great personal relationship. So I think Dean Spanos is still calling the shots out there. But if Telesco has anything to do with it, you have a guy who just molded a great young athletic quarterback into an MVP candidate, and you've got Justin Herbert sitting there. Man, that's an enticing combination. I will be flabbergasted and I don't know the Daboll's, head and shoulders the number one candidate out there, but he's in the mix. He's in that first tier of candidates. So if you have a first tier candidate who wants your job and has a good relationship with the GM, I'll be shocked if that's not the one that he wants to go after. So that combination of him wanting that job and him knowing the GM from their childhood together, that's a pretty tough hurdle to clear. But let's say they don't. I know you mentioned pre-show about, Eric Bieniemy was a running back there as well and has history there. So the owner is going to prefer Bieniemy, I would say. If you have Dean Spanos trump him, I do think you guys are right there. And I think you'd be neck and neck with Jacksonville as far as
Right.
young rosters, bevy of talent, tons of cap space, probably a better GM situation than obviously an open slate in Jacksonville. I think you guys would be right there with them in that next year.
Yeah, it sounds like LA is an obvious choice for Daboll. Just when you talk about he was teammates with the GM, and who doesn't want to be in LA? And it's probably the best jobber out there. I mean, just when you look at the roster and the situation that'll be inheriting. Greg, we really appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know it's a busy week. It's a Bills playoff game this weekend. But we really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to us, measly losing franchises. We really appreciate it.
If I can give you any hope, it's that if the Bills can turn into this juggernaut that people are picking to go on crazy playoff runs, then anybody can do it.
Well, hopefully our drought doesn't last as long as yours did.
Yeah, so I pray for you. I pray for you that it doesn't.
That was for the George fan comment. He just had to remind you. Greg, I mean, obviously our fans are Jets fans, so I don't imagine you're going to gain too many followers from this plug, but maybe people have had enough of New Jersey, and maybe they want to go to Western New York. So where can our listeners find you?
So I'll give my sales pitch. If you want to see the Patriots suffer in the short term, come root for the Bills. We will embarrass them on your behalf until you guys are ready. And then by all means, we will welcome you in stomping them down into the ground. You can find me at Greg Tompsett. And I will say from an actual sales pitch standpoint, although I am very Bills focused on the Cover One crew, we actually have some outstanding draft coverage guys that do really good work. So as you're doing it, we have some of the best film breakdown guys in the business that go through really detailed breakdowns of each of the draft candidates. So you can find some really good stuff over at cover1.net and over on our different channels on YouTube under the Cover One umbrella.
Yeah, I've been following Cover One for a while, even though I don't believe I've ever done a podcast with you, but it was I'd certainly enjoy getting to see what our rivals are up to and a lot of smart football content there. And who knows, maybe we'll have you back on to break down some Brian Daboll film if he is the next head coach of the New York Jets. I mean, one can only hope. He's certainly among the most popular candidates with Jets fans. Let us know what you think at CYJ Pod. Would Brian Daboll be a home run of a hire for Joe Douglas? You can follow myself at Ben W. Blessington, Michael_Nanny. You can find our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, JetsXFactor.com. Brian Daboll, ladies and gentlemen.
This time for the Jets.
Over the middle in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown. Hunter the beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown, most likely.
Looks right, fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel Mims.